Maya was an ordinary 16-year-old girl trying to enjoy her day like anyone else. It was a sunny afternoon at school, and she was sitting with her friends under a tree, laughing and chatting about the weekend. Her friends loved her unique hairstyle, a beautiful, thick head of black curls that she had spent hours perfecting. Maya had always taken great pride in her hair, feeling it was an important part of who she was. It was more than just hair to her. It was an expression of her culture, her strength, and her personality. Suddenly, without warning, the peaceful afternoon was interrupted by a loud voice. A man in a uniform walked toward them. Maya looked up, slightly confused. The officer, Officer Mallory, had been known to have a harsh and unpleasant reputation, but she had never had direct trouble with him before. He was someone who often appeared to have a bad attitude toward students. Maya's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't think much of it at first. She had no reason to fear him. But then, without any explanation, Officer Mallory walked straight up to her. Before she could react, he reached out, grabbed her by the shoulders, and in one swift motion, he began cutting off her hair with a pair of scissors. It all happened so fast, Maya didn't know what to do. She was frozen, shocked, unable to process what was happening. Her friends gasped, some of them trying to speak out, but they were too frightened to say anything. No one dared to stop the officer. Maya could only feel the cold scissors snipping through her curls, hearing the sound of each lock of hair falling to the ground. Tears started welling up in her eyes. She tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. The officer didn't seem to care about her feelings, only focusing on his cruel act. When he finally stopped, Maya's once beautiful, carefully styled hair was gone, left in piles around her feet. She could feel the cold air against her scalp, the exposed skin now vulnerable and bare. She was humiliated, not just because of the act, but because no one had done anything to stop it. It was as if no one cared about what had just happened to her. Officer Mallory simply walked away without a word, leaving Maya standing there, lost and devastated. Her friends tried to comfort her, but nothing could take away the sting of what had just occurred. The laughter and joy from earlier seemed like a distant memory now. Maya couldn't understand why this had happened to her. She had done nothing to deserve this, yet the officer had humiliated her in front of everyone. As she walked home that day, her mind raced with questions. Why did he do that? What had made him think it was okay? But most of all, how could he be so cruel? By the time Maya arrived home, the weight of what had happened hit her. She sat down, her hands trembling, and began to cry. It wasn't just the loss of her hair that hurt. It was the feeling of being powerless in that moment. She had always felt confident in who she was, but now her appearance had been stolen from her by someone who didn't even care. She looked in the mirror, but all she saw was a girl who had just been treated unfairly for reasons she couldn't understand. The moment was heartbreaking, and Maya felt helpless, but little did she know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Maya walked through the front door of her house, her heart heavy and her body tense. She barely noticed the usual hum of activity around her as she entered the living room. Her mother, who was in the kitchen preparing dinner, immediately looked up and smiled, but the moment she saw the expression on her daughter's face, her smile faded. Maya's mother, a kind and loving woman, knew something was wrong. "Sweetheart, what happened?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Maya couldn't hold it in any longer. She burst into tears, her emotions pouring out all at once. She explained everything: the officer, the scissors, the humiliation. As she spoke, her mother listened quietly, her face growing more serious with each passing moment. It was clear that Maya had never felt this hurt before, and her mother's heart broke for her. "Mom, I just don't understand," Maya choked out. "Why would he do that? I didn't do anything wrong. My hair, it's gone. It's like he wanted to destroy something that mattered to me." Her mother wrapped her arms around her, offering comfort in silence. She knew how important Maya's hair had been to her, and she could feel the pain her daughter was experiencing. But she also knew that this wasn't just about hair. It was about the deep injustice and cruelty that Maya had faced. "Maya will figure this out," her mother said firmly. "I'll make sure he understands that this isn't something that can be ignored." Maya wiped her eyes and nodded, trying to hold herself together. But deep down, she felt a growing sense of unease. What if nothing could be done? What if the officer's actions went unpunished? She didn't know how to move forward, but she knew she couldn't just let this go. Her mother, determined to take action, reached for her phone and made a call to someone Maya didn't expect. She called her husband, Maya's father, who worked in the business world and was well connected in their community. He wasn't home yet, but his voice on the other end of the line was calm and steady. "Maya's been hurt," her mother said. "I need you to do something. We can't let this go." Her father, a man known for his level-headed nature and integrity, listened carefully to what had happened. He didn't speak right away, but Maya could hear the change in his voice when he finally replied. "We'll handle this," he said. "This isn't over, Maya. You won't be left alone in this. Trust me." Maya wasn't sure what that meant, but hearing her father's words gave her a sense of relief. Maybe things would work out after all. She still couldn't understand why someone would act with such cruelty, but she knew that her family wouldn't let it slide. As she hung up the phone, her mother gave her a reassuring smile. "We'll take care of it," she repeated. "You're not alone in this." Maya felt a tiny spark of hope. She had always been proud of who she was, and even though this incident had shaken her to her core, she wasn't ready to give up on herself. With her family's support, she knew that whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. The next day, Maya woke up feeling both a little relieved and a little scared. She knew things weren't over, but with the support of her parents, she felt a glimmer of hope. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "We'll handle this." But what did that really mean? She had no idea. When Maya went to school that morning, the sight of her reflection in the bathroom mirror still felt strange. Her hair, once a big part of her identity, was now gone, and she felt exposed in a way she hadn't before. She walked through the halls with her head down, avoiding eye contact with most of her classmates. The whispers and stares didn't make it any easier, but what hurt the most was that she felt like an outsider in her own school. However, she noticed that some of her friends were still there for her. They gave her encouraging smiles, some of them even sending her text messages during class to let her know they were thinking of her. Maya appreciated it, but the pain of what had happened was still fresh. The injustice of it all seemed too big to grasp, but she knew she wasn't going to let herself stay silent forever. That afternoon, her father returned home earlier than usual. Maya's mother sat beside him at the kitchen table, talking quietly with him. Maya could tell they had been discussing the situation, and the look on her father's face was serious. "Maya," her father said gently, "I've spoken with some people who can help us. We're going to get to the bottom of this, and that officer won't get away with what he did to you." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. Maya looked up at him, trying to figure out what he meant. She had always seen her father as a strong, level-headed man, but today there was something different about him. His eyes were filled with determination, and she could tell that he was taking this situation seriously. Her mother, who had been sitting quietly beside him, nodded in agreement. "We're going to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Maya, you're not just going to be a victim here. We're going to make sure the truth comes out." Maya listened, a sense of calm washing over her. She knew her parents would do everything they could to help her, but it was hard to imagine what kind of consequences Officer Mallory might face. The thought of him continuing to do his job while she was left to pick up the pieces didn't sit well with her. She had no idea what her father had planned, but just hearing him say those words made her feel stronger. Later that evening, Maya's father made some important phone calls. He was well known in the community and had connections that extended beyond their local area. He was respected by many, and his voice carried weight. Maya didn't know exactly what he said during the calls, but when he hung up, he looked satisfied. "I've arranged for someone to look into Officer Mallory's actions," her father said. "They'll gather all the information we need. We're not letting this go. Maya felt a bit of relief, knowing that her family wasn't just going to let the incident fade away. For the first time since it happened, she felt like things might actually be okay. She still had a long way to go, but she wasn't going to be alone in this fight. With her parents by her side, and the determination in their voices, she knew that the road ahead might be difficult, but it wouldn't be impossible. The officer would have to face the consequences, and Maya wasn't going to back down. The next few days passed in a blur for Maya. She felt a constant mix of nervousness and anticipation. Her father had made the necessary calls, but she didn't know exactly what steps he was taking behind the scenes. He'd assured her that things would get better, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. Every time she saw Officer Mallory walking through the school halls, she felt a pang of anger, wondering if he was going to keep getting away with what he did to her. That morning, her father told her that they had gathered enough information to move forward. The officer's past actions, coupled with this latest incident, had caught the attention of the right people. Maya's father wasn't one to make idle threats, and she could see the serious look in his eyes when he spoke about what was next. "We'll make sure this doesn't slip through the cracks," he told her as they sat at the kitchen table. "I've contacted some trusted individuals in law enforcement. They're already looking into Officer Mallory's background, and we've set things in motion." Maya felt a mix of emotions, fear, hope, and a strange sense of power. It was a strange feeling, knowing that people were now working on her behalf. She hadn't asked for this attention, but now that it was happening, she felt more empowered than she had in days. Her mother stood by her side, reminding her that this wasn't just about her. It was about setting a better example for others too. "Don't forget, Maya," her mother said gently. "This is about showing everyone that cruelty and injustice won't be tolerated. Not by anyone. And it's about showing you that you have a voice, even when things seem unfair." Those words stuck with Maya throughout the day. She realized that this wasn't just about getting revenge or making Officer Mallory suffer. It was about standing up for herself and making sure that no one could take away her dignity without facing consequences. Meanwhile, Maya's friends noticed a change in her. She walked with more confidence now, even though the sting of what had happened still lingered. They could see that something was happening behind the scenes, and they began to rally around her, offering words of support and encouragement. Maya couldn't help but smile when they handed her notes or gave her hugs between classes. It was clear that her friends were on her side, and that gave her more strength than she'd ever realized. As the week went on, the news of the situation began to spread. People around the school started to talk about Officer Mallory's previous actions, and Maya heard whispers of others who had been unfairly treated in the past. It was as if everything was slowly starting to unravel, and it wasn't just about one officer anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about standing up to injustice in any form. Maya still didn't know the full extent of what her father had planned, but every passing day felt like another step toward getting the justice she deserved. She knew that the officer's career wouldn't go unchallenged now. There was a real possibility that everything might change, and Maya felt more determined than ever to be part of that change. At the end of the week, Maya's father sat down with her once again. This time, there was a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "We've made progress," he said. "Things are happening." Maya didn't need any further explanation. She could see it in her father's face. Things were moving in the right direction. Officer Mallory might have thought that his actions were going to be brushed under the rug, but Maya's family wasn't going to let that happen. She wasn't alone, and now it was just a matter of waiting for the pieces to fall into place. The fight for justice had only just begun. Days passed, and Maya felt a growing tension in the air. It was like everyone was waiting for something to happen, but no one quite knew what. Her father had been busy making calls, arranging meetings, and getting the attention of people who could help. Even though Maya didn't know all the details, she could feel that something big was coming. The whispers around school had become louder, and more people were asking about Officer Mallory's past. It was clear that the officer's actions were no longer being ignored. One afternoon, her father called Maya into the living room. a serious expression on his face. Her mother was already sitting beside him, her eyes focused on Maya. It was clear this was an important moment. Maya took a seat across from them, her heart beating a little faster than usual. "Maya," her father started, his voice calm but firm, "I've spoken with some people who are in a position to make a real change. They've been looking into Officer Mallory's background, and the truth is, he's been involved in more than just this incident with you. He has a history of making questionable decisions, and now we have the support to make sure he faces the consequences." Maya's mind raced. She had suspected that Officer Mallory wasn't just a random bad actor in her life, but hearing her father speak like this made everything feel more real. The officer wasn't just some random cruel figure. He was someone who had made a habit of crossing the line, and now there were people who were going to make sure he paid for it. Her father continued, his voice steady. "We've made sure that the right people are involved. We're going to confront him with the truth of what he's done, and he won't be able to deny it. This isn't just about what happened to you, Maya. It's about holding him accountable for everything." Maya nodded slowly. She had always trusted her father's judgment, but now she felt something deeper, an almost electric sense of power that came from knowing that something was being done. Officer Mallory wouldn't be able to just walk away from what he had done. Later that afternoon, her father met with several important individuals in the community, each one someone who could bring real change to the situation. Maya didn't know exactly what happened behind closed doors, but she could tell that her father was doing everything in his power to make sure that justice was served. The next day, the tension in the school seemed to grow. Maya couldn't help but overhear conversations in the hallways as students whispered about Officer Mallory's past. His name had become a topic of discussion, and Maya realized that the officer was no longer the untouchable figure he had once been. The whispers spread faster than anyone expected. Soon, the entire school was buzzing with rumors, and the students seemed to rally around the idea of standing up to injustice. Maya felt a mixture of emotions, relief, hope, and even a little fear. Fear of what would happen when everything came to light, fear of what it would mean for her family. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew it was the right thing to do. She wasn't going to let this man get away with his actions, not anymore. The following week, her father arranged a meeting with the police department. This was the moment when everything was going to change. Maya's heart raced as she realized just how much was at stake. Her family's involvement had opened doors that couldn't be closed, and it was clear that Officer Mallory's actions were finally going to be examined under a microscope. The officer had underestimated how much damage his cruelty could cause, not realizing that his past would catch up to him. That evening, as Maya sat quietly at home, she thought about what was happening. She felt a sense of pride, knowing that her family had fought for her. Her father's words rang in her ears. "This isn't just about you, Maya. It's about standing up to something bigger." And with that, Maya knew that no matter what happened next, she had already won in one important way. She had shown the world that standing up for what's right mattered more than anything. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind for Maya. She could feel the tension building up all around her. At school, the whispers continued to grow louder, but it wasn't just gossip anymore. People were starting to take action, and it seemed like the entire school was watching and waiting for what would happen next. Maya had never felt more in the spotlight, but this time, it didn't feel like the humiliation she had experienced earlier. Now, it felt like she was at the center of something important, something that could bring real change. Her father had kept his word. He had done everything he could to make sure Officer Mallory would face the consequences of his actions. Maya didn't know all the details, but the news she had been waiting for came one evening when her father returned home. He looked at Maya with a look of determination in his eyes. "We've made progress," he said, sitting down beside her. "The investigation into Officer Mallory is moving forward. The right people are involved now, and it's clear that this won't be swept under the rug." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had always trusted her father's judgment, but hearing the words out loud made her feel like the weight of the situation was finally starting to lift. Officer Mallory had no idea what was coming for him. The investigation had revealed more about Officer Mallory than Maya could have ever imagined. It wasn't just the incident with her that had raised concern. Officer Mallory's history of making poor and prejudiced decisions over the years had finally caught the attention of the right people. His actions weren't just confined to one moment of cruelty. They were part of a pattern that had gone unnoticed for far too long. Maya's father had connected with individuals within the police department who had seen the same troubling behavior from Officer Mallory in the past. With their help, the truth about the officer was finally coming to light. Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. She had been so afraid that Officer Mallory's actions would be dismissed, that nothing would happen to him. But now she could see that her father's efforts were paying off. At school, Maya started to notice the change. It wasn't just her friends who were standing behind her anymore. More students were speaking up, discussing what had happened, and showing their support for her. Some teachers even began talking to Maya, offering words of comfort and assurance that what had happened wasn't acceptable. Maya was overwhelmed with gratitude. She had never imagined that something so painful could lead to so many people coming together in support. One day after class, Maya was approached by a group of students who had been quietly observing the situation. They told her that they had been inspired by her strength and courage. They had seen how she had stood up for herself, and it made them feel empowered to do the same in their own lives. Maya was surprised and humbled. She hadn't realized how much her story had touched others. But now it seemed that people were finally starting to understand the importance of standing up to cruelty and injustice. Even though things were moving in the right direction, Maya still felt a bit uneasy. She didn't know what would happen when Officer Mallory was confronted with the truth. Would he deny it? Would he try to cover it up? But she also knew that no matter what, she wasn't alone. Her family was behind her. The community was rallying around her, and the truth was finally on her side. As the days went by, Maya began to feel more confident. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her since the incident began to fade away. She knew that things would never be the same, but she was okay with that. She had become a symbol of resilience, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever faced cruelty or injustice. And with each step that was taken toward justice, she knew that she was making a difference, not just for her own healing, but for others who had been hurt in similar ways. Her father had been right. This wasn't just about what had happened to her. It was about making sure that the world took a long, hard look at what was really going on. And that, in itself, was a victory. As the days passed, the weight of the situation seemed to shift. The investigation into Officer Mallory was gaining momentum, and Maya could feel the energy in the air change. It was no longer just about the pain she had felt when her hair was cut off. It was about something much bigger. Her father's actions and the support of the community had set a course that no one could ignore. The officer who had once seemed untouchable was now facing the consequences of his choices, and Maya's role in all of this was no longer something she had to hide from. She was beginning to embrace her voice. Maya had been dreading the day when Officer Mallory would be confronted with the full truth. But as the investigation continued, it became clearer that the evidence against him was undeniable. Officer Mallory's history of inappropriate actions and biased behavior had finally been put under a microscope, and no amount of denial could change the facts. It was clear that something had to be done, and it was becoming evident that the officer would not escape unscathed. One afternoon, Maya's father sat her down once again. This time, his expression was a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. He looked at Maya, his voice calm yet powerful. "We've reached a point where we have no more waiting to do. Officer Mallory will be held accountable for what he did, not just to you, but for all the harm he has caused. We've gathered all the information we need, and it's time for him to face the truth." Maya felt a surge of relief. It had been such a long journey, and the uncertainty had weighed heavily on her. But now, it seemed like the end was in sight. Officer Mallory was going to be confronted with his actions, and she wasn't going to have to hide in the shadows anymore. Maya had become a symbol of strength throughout this process, and she was beginning to realize the true power of standing up for what was right. The next day, the entire school seemed to buzz with anticipation. The news about Officer Mallory's impending confrontation had spread quickly. It wasn't just about what had happened to Maya anymore. It was about the truth being revealed to everyone. As the students went about their day, they couldn't help but talk about the upcoming changes. They knew something big was coming, and it made them think about how much they could accomplish if they, too, stood up to injustice. Maya felt a strange calm wash over her. She had spent so much time worrying about how this would end, but now she wasn't scared anymore. The more she thought about the situation, the more she realized that this was bigger than just her personal pain. This was about teaching people that no one should ever feel small or powerless. No one should ever feel like their dignity can be taken from them without consequences. That afternoon, Maya's father met with the officials who would handle the final stages of Officer Mallory's case. When he returned home that evening, he looked at Maya with pride. "It's done," he said, his voice firm but reassuring. "The officer will face the consequences of his actions. The investigation has been thorough, and the truth has been made clear. He won't be able to get away with this anymore." Maya's heart soared with relief. She had known this day would come, but hearing the words made it feel real. Officer Mallory would not get away with the harm he had caused, and Maya knew that this moment wasn't just about justice for her. It was about making sure others would never have to go through what she had. Her mother wrapped her arms around her, holding her tightly. "You did it, Maya," she said softly. "You showed everyone the power of standing up for what's right." Maya smiled, feeling the warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She had endured so much, but now she could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. The victory wasn't just hers. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been mistreated or misunderstood. Maya had found her voice, and with it, she had changed everything. The next day, Officer Mallory was officially removed from his position, and his actions were publicly addressed. His career was ruined, and the community made it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated. Maya's family, along with the support of their friends and community, had ensured that justice was done. It wasn't just about punishing one person. It was about sending a message that no one, regardless of their position, could escape the consequences of their actions when they hurt others. Maya stood tall, proud of what she had accomplished. She knew that the road ahead would still have challenges, but she also knew that she had learned the most important lesson of all: the power of resilience, the power of standing up for what was right, and the power of finding strength even in the darkest moments. The days following Officer Mallory's removal were a mixture of relief and reflection for Maya. She no longer felt the sting of humiliation every time she stepped into school. Instead, she walked with a newfound sense of pride. The journey had been long, but as each day passed, it became clearer to Maya that her courage had made a difference, not only for her but for others as well. The whispers around school, once filled with cruelty and gossip, had turned into conversations about standing up for what's right. Maya had spent so much time wondering if her actions could ever change anything. She never imagined that by standing up for herself, she could inspire others to do the same. Now she saw how her story had become a symbol of strength, not just for those who had witnessed the injustice, but for those who had been silently enduring similar struggles. It was a reminder that no one had to suffer in silence, that everyone had a voice that deserved to be heard. At home, Maya's parents continued to support her every step of the way. Her father, who had always been her quiet protector, was now more involved than ever. He would sit with her after school, talking about the future and reminding her of the importance of what they had accomplished. "We've made the world a little better, Maya," he would say with a smile. "You stood up for yourself, and that changed everything. But don't stop now. Keep speaking your truth." Maya had never felt closer to her father. She had always known that he was a strong and wise figure, but now she understood just how much he cared for her well-being and the well-being of others. It wasn't just about fixing the wrongs that had been done. It was about showing the world that people like Maya who had been wronged, could rise above it and demand better. Her mother, too, had been an unwavering pillar of support. She would often remind Maya to be proud of what she had done and how her actions had created a ripple effect. "Sometimes the hardest thing is to speak up," her mother would say. "But you did it, Maya, and look at the change you've brought. Never forget that your voice is powerful." As the weeks went on, Maya noticed subtle changes around her. More students began to open up about their own experiences with bullying or injustice. They would approach her in the hallways, offering stories of how they had been inspired by her to stand up for themselves or others. Maya hadn't realized how far her actions had reached until she began to hear these stories. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was a collective movement of people who had come together to create something better. Maya's confidence grew with each passing day. The girl who had once felt vulnerable and unsure was now someone who could face any challenge. She had learned that standing up for herself wasn't about being loud or confrontational. It was about having the courage to be heard, even when the world seemed indifferent. It was about showing others that even the smallest act of defiance against injustice could spark something powerful. One afternoon, Maya sat down with her friends, who had been by her side through everything. They had supported her when things felt impossible, and now they celebrated the victory together. They talked about the future, about the changes they hoped to see in the world. Maya realized that while her own journey had been difficult, it had opened her eyes to the strength within her, and the strength within those around her. "I think we've started something," one of her friends said, smiling. "You've shown all of us that we can do something when we see something wrong. It's like you've given us permission to stand up too." Maya smiled back, feeling a deep sense of pride. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a fight for everyone who had ever felt silenced or forgotten. She had learned that change could start with one person, but it could grow into something much larger. As the months passed, Maya's life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. Officer Mallory's actions were now a part of the past, and the school, along with the community, had learned valuable lessons. Maya no longer felt the need to prove herself to anyone. She knew that she had already done something important. In the end, Maya realized that true strength wasn't about avoiding hardship. It was about facing it head-on, learning from it, and using it to become a better version of herself. And no matter where life took her, she would always carry with her the lessons of courage, resilience, and the importance of standing up for what was right.